You crack an egg into a pan. The white spreads out, the yolk sits in the middle, and within a few minutes you have breakfast. Simple, familiar, something millions of people do every single morning without a second thought. But then, just for a moment, a strange question crosses your mind. Was that a life? Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that ruins your breakfast, but genuinely. That egg came from a living creature. It had a yolk, which is essentially a biological package designed for growth. So are you eating something that could have become a living bird? And if the answer is yes, does that change anything? Most people push that thought away quickly and go back to their toast. But the question is actually worth sitting with for a moment, because the answer is more nuanced than a simple yes or no, and understanding it properly changes how you see something you have probably never questioned in your entire life. Humans have been eating eggs for a very long time. Thousands of years before anyone had a farm or a grocery store, people were climbing trees and reaching into nests. Eggs were reliable, portable, nutritious, and available in nature without the need to hunt or kill anything. Ancient civilizations from Egypt to China kept birds specifically for their eggs. It was one of the earliest forms of food production humans ever developed. For most of that history, the question of whether an egg was a life never really came up in a complicated way. People lived close to animals. They understood, in a very practical sense, how reproduction worked. A hen laid eggs regularly. Some of those eggs were fertilized and hatched into chicks. Most, especially in a domestic setting where hens were often kept away from roosters, were not. The distinction was understood and accepted as part of everyday life. The modern confusion around this question actually grew out of how disconnected most people have become from where their food comes from. When eggs arrive in a clean carton from a supermarket, looking identical and perfectly sized, it becomes very easy to forget that an egg is a biological object with its own story, and that forgetting is where the question starts to feel more unsettling than it needs to be.
Here's what most people assume. They assume that every egg has the potential to become a chick, and therefore eating an egg is in some way eating a life that could have been. It is an understandable assumption. An egg is produced by a hen, chicks come from eggs, therefore every egg is a potential chick. But this is where the biology becomes really interesting. The eggs you buy at a supermarket are almost certainly unfertilized. To produce a fertilized egg, a hen needs to mate with a rooster. In commercial egg farming, roosters are not present. The hens lay eggs on their own through a completely natural biological cycle in the same way that a human female goes through a monthly cycle regardless of whether fertilization occurs. Those eggs, without the presence of a rooster, have no genetic material from a male. They cannot develop into a chick, not under any conditions. There is no embryo. There is no potential animal waiting inside. It is biologically closer to the cycle itself than to a fertilized beginning of life. Think of it this way. The yolk and the white of an egg are essentially nutrition, a food supply that nature designed to support a developing embryo if fertilization had occurred. But without fertilization, that food supply is just that, food. It never becomes anything else because the biological trigger that starts development was never there. A fertilized egg looks almost identical to an unfertilized one from the outside, but internally the difference is everything. One contains the beginning of a life, the other simply does not. So why does this confusion persist? Partly because the word egg carries emotional weight. We associate eggs with birth, with new beginnings, with small, fragile things that need protection. These associations are deeply rooted in how we talk about eggs in language, in stories, and in culture. When we think of an egg, we instinctively think of what hatches from it. That mental image is hard to separate from the object sitting in your fridge. There is also the fact that some people do eat fertilized eggs. In certain cultures, dishes are made from eggs at early stages of development, and those are genuinely different in the way they touch on questions of life. But those are specific, intentional choices, not what is happening in the average kitchen on an average morning. For the vast majority of people eating commercially produced eggs, the philosophical concern dissolves when you understand the biology. You are not interrupting a life, you are eating something that was never going to become one. The clearer way to think about this is simple. Life requires a specific set of conditions to begin. An unfertilized egg does not meet those conditions. Eating it is no more a moral question than eating any other food that comes from a natural biological process. What this whole question really reveals is how little most of us know about the most ordinary things in our lives. We eat eggs every day and never stop to understand what they actually are. And when we finally do ask the question, the answer is not disturbing, it is actually reassuring. The egg in your pan was never waiting to become something, it was always just breakfast. If this gave you a clearer, calmer way of thinking about something that might have quietly bothered you, go ahead and like this video. Share it with someone who has ever asked this question and never quite got a satisfying answer. And if you enjoy understanding the real story behind the everyday things we take for granted, subscribe. There is always more to learn about the world hiding in plain sight.